What if the most devastating way to defeat someone isn't with anger, shouting, or exposing their flaws? What if the real power lies in quiet control, in smiling politely, while your opponent slowly unravels before your eyes? This is the genius of Machiavelli's strategy, polite destruction. It's a silent, subtle form of power that no one sees coming, and once mastered, it can leave your enemies defeated without ever raising your voice. In a world where emotional reactions are currency, refusing to give your adversary what they crave, your anger, your attention, robs them of control. Polite destruction isn't about rage or revenge. It's about strategic calm, emotional mastery, and letting others destroy themselves while you remain untouched. Today we'll explore how you can harness this powerful tactic to maintain your dignity, protect your peace, and silently dismantle anyone who threatens your power. When most people think of destroying an enemy or rival, they imagine loud confrontations, angry arguments, or exposing someone's mistakes with force and fury. This kind of destruction is noisy, visible, and often chaotic. It grabs attention because it's raw and emotional. But this is exactly what Machiavelli warned against. Real power, he taught, is subtle, strategic, and often invisible. Polite destruction is the art of dismantling someone's influence and control without making a scene. It's about refusing to engage in the expected battle, the shouting match, the accusations, the personal attacks, and instead responding with calmness, politeness, and detachment. This silent strategy disarms opponents not by force, but by removing the very fuel they depend on your emotional reaction. Why does this work? Because many people, especially those who crave dominance or control, are addicted to the emotional responses they provoke. They feed on your anger, your embarrassment, your defense. These reactions validate their power and keep them at the center of your world. When you stop reacting, you starve them of their emotional supply. Suddenly, they lose their grip, their leverage, and most importantly, their sense of importance. To understand this better, imagine a workplace bully who constantly taunts you to get a rise out of you. Every insult is designed to provoke a reaction that gives them power and status. But what happens if you smile politely instead? You don't argue, you don't retaliate, and you don't show the slightest sign that their words affected you. Slowly, their power fades, because they are no longer the center of your emotional universe. Their attacks become meaningless. This is polite destruction in action, destroying their influence not by confrontation, but by calm detachment. Machiavelli's insight goes deeper than just ignoring provocations. He believed every human interaction is a negotiation of power. When wielded correctly, power should feel inevitable and controlled, not impulsive or chaotic. Polite destruction leverages this by making the opponent's efforts to provoke or control you not only fail, but backfire. They expect conflict and resistance, but you give them silence and cooperation. They expect drama and retaliation, but you give them grace and distance. This silent strategy is not passive. It requires immense self-control and discipline traits that many people lack. It means you hold your emotions tightly and refuse to give your opponent the satisfaction of a visible reaction. But it's more than just self-restraint. It's an active form of psychological warfare. By being polite yet distant, you create ambiguity. Your opponents don't know whether you care or not, whether you're playing a long game or simply indifferent. This uncertainty unnerves them more than open hostility ever could. Let's dive into why ambiguity and silence hold such power. When someone loses the ability to predict your reactions, they lose their sense of control. Power thrives on predictability. If you know someone will get angry or defensive, you can use that knowledge to manipulate them. But if your responses are unreadable, calm, measured, polite, your opponent is forced to question everything. Was that smile genuine? Did they really agree with me? Do they even notice me anymore? This uncertainty breeds paranoia, frustration, and self-doubt. Consider the psychological toll on a rival who realizes you no longer react to their provocations. They might escalate their attacks, hoping to break your calm, but every failed attempt chips away at their confidence. Others around them start noticing the shift. Your silence becomes a weapon that silently isolates them. Without your emotional engagement, they begin to self-sabotage. This strategy also exploits the human tendency to rely on social validation. By refusing to give your opponent attention or reaction, you shrink their social influence. In social settings, whether at work, in friendships, or in politics, people depend on others' reactions to build their status. Polite destruction cuts off this social currency. You don't need to attack. You simply withdraw your emotional presence. The opponent's power erodes quietly but relentlessly. This concept extends beyond personal rivalries. It applies to leadership negotiations and even social media conflicts. For instance, responding to online trolls with silence or polite deflection often frustrates them more than direct confrontation. Their goal is to provoke and unsettle. By denying them this, you neutralize their impact without adding fuel to the fire. Polite destruction is not about being a doormat or avoiding conflict out of fear. It's a calculated, conscious choice to control the narrative and maintain your peace. It requires understanding that sometimes the most powerful move is not to fight, but to step outside the game entirely. When you do this, you demonstrate mastery over your emotions and your environment. One personal example comes from a business negotiation I observed. A competitor tried to unsettle the lead negotiator with veiled insults and condescending remarks. Instead of responding emotionally, the lead negotiator smiled, nodded, and even complimented the competitor's confidence in front of everyone. Behind the scenes, he subtly influenced other stakeholders, planting doubts about the competitor's strategy. By the end, the competitor was left isolated, unsure of his standing, while the lead negotiator maintained composure and control. This wasn't mere politeness, it was polite destruction executed with precision. In summary, polite destruction is about erasing your opponent's power by withdrawing your emotional reactions, creating ambiguity, and quietly influencing perception. It's a strategic withdrawal that leaves others disarmed and confused. And it's a lesson in emotional mastery, a reminder that true power is often silent and unseen. Now that we understand the philosophy behind polite destruction, the quiet strategic withdrawal of emotional engagement, it's essential to break down the specific tactics that transform this idea into an effective reality. These are not just abstract concepts, but practical moves that can be applied in everyday life work, and even high-stakes environments like politics and business. Machiavelli would recognize these subtle techniques as the essence of power, precise, controlled, and overwhelmingly effective. One of the most impactful methods is what I call social freezing. Imagine walking into a room where you once felt warmth, recognition, or influence, only to find it now cold, distant, and unfamiliar. This is not due to any direct confrontation or angry outburst, but because someone has withdrawn their emotional energy and engagement. They greet you politely, respond civilly, but everything feels mechanical, almost rehearsed. The person's presence is no longer a source of warmth or validation, it has become neutral, detached. This shift is terrifying to those who thrived on emotional connection or provocation. They expected some reaction, whether it be anger, embarrassment, or even confrontation, but instead are met with a calm, polite distance that neither encourages nor condemns. This emotional oxygen has been quietly removed. Social freezing forces adversaries to face their dwindling significance in your world, and the chill of exclusion hits them before a single word is spoken. It's a powerful, invisible weapon that destabilizes without aggression. Closely tied to social freezing is the tactic of mirrored deference. Here, you respond to the energy your opponent projects, but with a strategic twist that undermines their position without direct attack. For instance, if someone dismisses your ideas or tries to dominate a discussion, you start deferring to their viewpoints in public, but in a way that subtly spotlights their flaws. You might say, "That's an interesting approach," or "I appreciate your confidence on this," all with a calm, measured smile. On the surface, this seems courteous and respectful, but underneath lies a clear message: you're placing the burden of accountability and potentially blame on them. This tactic is a masterclass in subtlety because it avoids direct confrontation that might provoke resistance. Instead, by amplifying their mistakes and making them the visible face of failure, you erode their credibility and influence over time. People around them begin to notice inconsistencies or flaws that the opponent can no longer deny or deflect. All of this happens while you maintain an appearance of grace and civility. Praise, when wielded with precision, can also become a weapon of polite destruction. Strategic vague praise means complimenting someone with language that sounds supportive, but is deliberately ambiguous, leaving room for interpretation. Telling a rival, "You handled that situation very interestingly," or "Your leadership style is certainly unique," might at first seem like genuine praise. However, the ambiguity triggers doubt in the minds of listeners. Is this praise or a subtle critique? The opponent, as well as others observing, begin to question the sincerity of your words. This causes discomfort and uncertainty that slowly chips away at their confidence. When combined with your flawless performance and calm demeanor, the contrast between your polished grace and their growing insecurity becomes even more glaring. You appear gracious and above reproach, yet quietly undermine their standing. Another essential technique in polite destruction is mastering the duality of public agreement and private undermining. In public, you openly support your opponent's ideas or decisions, creating a sense of trust and safety. They believe you are an ally, which lowers their guard. Behind the scenes, however, you work to subtly influence others, whether colleagues, mutual acquaintances, or decision-makers, to question and doubt your opponent's competence. You plant seeds of uncertainty with carefully phrased questions, reminders of past mistakes, or by highlighting contradictions in a way that seems casual rather than confrontational. This gradual erosion of social support appears organic, not orchestrated, which makes it all the more effective. Your opponent finds themselves surrounded by smiles, but simultaneously met with distrust, leading to social isolation that feels mysterious and deeply painful. This quiet alienation is a hallmark of polite destruction and one of its most devastating effects. One of the most elegant tactics in this arsenal is Socratic sabotage, using questions as weapons. Instead of confronting or attacking you, invite your opponent to explain their reasoning or decisions in public settings. Questions such as, "Could you walk us through your thinking on that?" Or, "How do you see this aligning with our overall goals?" sound innocuous, but place the opponent under pressure to justify themselves. If their logic is weak or inconsistent, they expose themselves without you ever uttering a harsh word. This approach puts them on the defensive, forcing them to over-explain or reveal gaps in knowledge or planning. The psychological impact is severe. They feel vulnerable and exposed, while you remain composed, polite, and seemingly curious. This dynamic leaves observers questioning the opponent's competence more than any direct criticism could. Real-world examples of these tactics abound, especially in politics and corporate power struggles. Take, for instance, a well-known political figure who faced relentless attacks from a rival adept at provoking public outrage. Rather than engage in the expected battles, this figure maintained a calm, smiling demeanor during debates, agreeing with minor points and complimenting the rival's passion publicly. Behind closed doors, however, the politician quietly worked to erode the rivals' alliances and planted doubts about their expertise among key advisors. Slowly, the rivals' influence diminished as supporters wavered in confidence. Publicly, there was never a direct confrontation, only a silent strategic dismantling of reputation and power that unfolded like a carefully crafted chess game. This example highlights that polite destruction is often a long game requiring patience, emotional control, and subtlety. The success of these tactics lies in their focus on the emotional and social underpinnings of power, rather than merely surface-level control or authority. Power is as much about perception, influence, and social validation as it is about direct action. By refusing to react emotionally, you deprive your opponent of leverage and control. Maintaining ambiguity and polite detachment fosters confusion and doubt. Humans, especially those craving control, abhor uncertainty. This breeds second-guessing paranoia and alienation from allies. Furthermore, the stark contrast between your poised calm and their escalating frustration magnifies their loss of control. Your silence and grace become louder than any shout or attack. In practical terms, this means you don't need to be aggressive or loud to win. Your composure, strategic politeness, and subtle undermining are enough to unbalance even the most confident adversaries. The beauty of polite destruction is that it leaves no overt wounds or evidence of battle. Instead, it silently reshapes social dynamics, leaving your opponent isolated, insecure, and ultimately powerless, all while you remain untouched, dignified, and in control. Understanding the key tactics of polite destruction is crucial, but the true mastery lies in how you apply them, especially as the conflict moves toward its final phases. The essence of polite destruction is not only how you behave during confrontation, but also how you withdraw and disengage gracefully, leaving a lasting impression of control and power. One of the most potent elements of this strategy is the graceful exit. Unlike dramatic confrontations or fiery breakups, a polite destruction ends not with noise, but with silence. You do not need to shout, accuse, or even issue ultimatums. Instead, you simply stop showing up. You withdraw your presence quietly and deliberately, creating a void that your adversary cannot fill. This absence is far more powerful than any confrontation because it forces them to face the reality that they no longer have access to your attention, your energy, or your influence. Imagine a relationship or friendship where one person continually seeks emotional reactions and validation from the other. When the latter decides to exit gracefully without anger or drama, the first person is left confused, desperate, and powerless. They may try to provoke a response, beg for reconciliation, or resort to compliments and apologies. Yet if you maintain your polite distance, responding slowly, never initiating contact, and keeping your tone neutral, you send the strongest message possible. Forgiveness is granted, but access is forever denied. This is emotional exile, a form of banishment far more profound than any public humiliation. The psychological impact of this approach cannot be overstated. When someone realizes they are no longer the center of your emotional universe, they begin to unravel internally. Their confidence wavers, their social standing diminishes, and paranoia sets in. They start questioning their every move, unsure of who to trust or how to regain their lost influence. This silent collapse often happens without anyone noticing immediately, but over time it dismantles reputations and weakens enemies in a way loud battles never could. Another critical tactic in the final phase of polite destruction is the use of what might be called empty praise. Throughout interactions, you may offer compliments that seem sincere on the surface, but are deliberately vague or oddly timed. Compliments like, "You always handle situations so uniquely," or "Your confidence is admirable," sound positive, but carry an undercurrent of ambiguity that makes people doubt their meaning. When combined with flawless performance and emotional detachment, these praises create a stark contrast that eats away at the target's self-esteem. They are left wondering if the praise is genuine or a subtle jab masked as kindness. In social or professional settings, these subtle forms of praise paired with polite distance work like a slow drip of poison. Your target is praised, but simultaneously isolated. Others sense the tension beneath your words and demeanor, even if no one can quite put their finger on it. This ambiguity creates confusion and forces the opponent to expend energy defending themselves against invisible attacks. Polite destruction also involves what could be called social freezing, a form of measured disengagement where you stop investing emotional warmth in the relationship or environment without severing ties completely. You greet people, respond to messages, and maintain surface-level politeness, but you no longer provide the emotional validation that once empowered your adversary. This strategic withdrawal makes the space feel cold and empty, disorienting those who once relied on your attention for status and control. The absence of warmth and engagement becomes a form of silent punishment. Mirror deference is another subtle but devastating tactic. When your opponent dismisses your ideas or behaves arrogantly, you respond by publicly deferring to them, but with a calculated twist. Your support is given with a smile and polite language, yet it highlights their weaknesses indirectly. You become the person who always supports the leader publicly, while quietly influencing others to doubt the same person's competence. This dual approach makes it difficult for the target to detect your undermining efforts, and harder for others to defend them. Socratic sabotage is an especially refined tool in polite destruction. By asking innocent but pointed questions in public, you invite your opponent to explain their decisions and logic in detail, often exposing inconsistencies, poor planning, or gaps in knowledge. For example, asking, "Could you clarify how that decision aligns with our goals?" Or, "Would you mind explaining the rationale behind that approach?" places the opponent under pressure to justify themselves without feeling directly attacked. This tactic forces them to reveal weaknesses on their own, which can be more damaging than any accusation you might make. Real-world examples abound. In corporate boardrooms or political debates, some of the most successful leaders never engage in loud disputes. Instead, they master the art of polite destruction, agreeing publicly with opponents to build a facade of cooperation while quietly dismantling their influence behind closed doors. These leaders understand that power is perception, and controlling that perception through subtlety often achieves far more than confrontation. Perhaps the most profound aspect of polite destruction is that it requires tremendous emotional discipline. Many people fall into the trap of believing that power means domination through aggression or visible control. Machiavelli's lesson is the opposite. True power lies in self-control, in the ability to remain composed and strategic regardless of provocation. This is why polite destruction is not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate weapon of strength. This approach also shifts the focus from short-term victories to long-term legacy. Loud confrontations may win battles, but often leave scars and enemies. Polite destruction, in contrast, erases enemies quietly and permanently, leaving behind a reputation for grace control and unshakable power. People fear the silence and calm because it suggests a level of mastery they cannot match. Finally, polite destruction teaches us that sometimes the best way to win is not to fight at all. By refusing to play the game your opponent wants, by denying them the emotional reactions they depend on, and by controlling your own narrative with grace and precision, you effectively rewrite the rules of engagement. You create a reality where victory is inevitable, even if it's invisible. So when you face someone who threatens your peace, your power, or your potential, remember that you don't have to respond with anger or exposure. Instead, smile politely, hold your composure, and start withdrawing your emotional energy strategically. Let them unravel themselves while you remain untouchable. This is polite destruction, the art of winning quietly and permanently. In the end, polite destruction is not just a strategy, it's a mindset. It's the mastery of self-control and emotional intelligence that allows you to rise above chaos and conflict. Instead of stooping to loud fights, threats, or retaliation, you choose a path of calm precision. You understand that real power doesn't announce itself with noise. It is felt quietly like gravity, pulling everything into its orbit. When you practice polite destruction, you take away the fuel your opponents rely on. You refuse to give them the emotional reactions that empower them, and in doing so, you strip them of their control. They become lost in confusion, doubt, and social isolation, while you remain composed, dignified, and firmly in command of your own narrative. This approach transforms conflict from a battlefield into a chess game where every move is calculated and every silence speaks volumes. It demands patience and discipline, but the rewards are immense. You don't just win a moment, you shape the long-term story of your power and legacy. Remember, polite destruction isn't about cruelty or revenge. It's about protecting your peace, preserving your dignity, and building a reputation that precedes you, a reputation for grace under pressure and quiet dominance. The most dangerous people in history mastered this art not by shouting the loudest, but by making others question what they thought they understood. They fought with silence and strategy, not noise and anger. So next time you face someone who tries to provoke or undermine, you resist the urge to react impulsively. Smile politely, stay calm, and let them unravel on their own. Your silence will speak louder than any argument, and your absence will echo longer than any confrontation. In a world obsessed with loud victories, be the one who wins quietly and permanently. Master polite destruction, and you master the ultimate form of power, one that no one can challenge, because it is built not on aggression, but on control, grace, and unshakable confidence.